In this episode, I'll be speaking with Judy Heidrich, who is a licensed psychotherapist, a trauma resolution specialist, a mental health counselor, and a coach. Judy specializes in trauma resolution and integrated mind-body healing modalities, as well as energy-based healing approaches. This includes RRT, which stands for Rapid Resolution Therapy, Healing Touch Therapy, Soul Collage Therapy, as well as various breathwork techniques. Judy has supported numerous clients on improving their mental health as well as improving their emotional and physiological well-being. In this conversation, we discuss anxiety and social anxiety, attachment styles, and a few other psychology concepts such as different ego states, the big self versus the little self, and more, all as a framework to help understand ourselves better and the people around us as well. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi, Judy. Thank you for being here and being on my show. It's so nice to see you. How are you doing today?
Hello, Alia. Thank you for having me. I'm well and just delighted to be here and to be with you today and to share all of the great information that we're going to talk about today.
Yes, I am too. As a clinician and an experienced psychotherapist and licensed mental health practitioner, I am so grateful, and my audience, I'm sure, will be grateful to hear everything you have to share with us today. We're all struggling with something, and I know that through your experience, you've been helping people with their mental health, with improving their relationship with themselves and with other people as well, improving their relationship with others. And I would love to unpack that with you today. So I think we're going to start with anxiety and then go further into unpacking social anxiety and what that is and how it shows up in the body. Maybe we start with anxiety, and if you could just help us understand what's going on in the body when we experience that level of stress.
Sure. There can be many reasons why someone experiences anxiety. It can be chronic anxiety. It can be situational anxiety. Regardless of what it is, anyone who's feeling anxiety feels distress. They feel unease. They want to find a place back to homeostasis. Many people can do that quickly because of techniques that are available, and others who, as an example, who have had this chronically, it's really hard for them to manage that level. I call anxiety the hum. That, somebody will say, well, how do I know if I have anxiety? And I always say that it might quiet, but that little hum is still there. And we know if the hum is on, off, or if it's changes decibels. And when we talk about anxiety, I always say if the hum is there, there's anxiety. Some people have no hum. There's no hum. They don't feel anxiety. Maybe just a little situational thing here or there, but it's not something that's constant for them. And when anxiety is constant, it affects every cell of our body. It affects our nervous system, our heart rate. It affects our social interactions. It affects everything. So I always ask and first get into if someone comes in with anxiety, I always assess the hum first because I want to know at what level that is.
Yeah, and what's happening on a nervous system level when we experience anxiety? And you're so right to point out that it affects so many different systems of the body. As a health coach, I talk about anxiety with my clients because I know it affects our gut health. I know it affects our reproductive system. I know how the body and the mind are so interconnected, and I'm sure we'll unpack the mind-body connection at some point in this conversation. But for people listening, can you help us understand and conceptualize what's going on in the autonomic nervous system when we experience anxiety?
Sure. We have what is called the autonomic nervous system, and I like to see that as just a circle with these two branches. The first branch is the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. This is the fight, flight response. The freeze response is in there. Sometimes I talk about a fawning response that's in there. It's where everything is on high alert. Everything about your system is looking for a perceived threat or danger based on something it has seen, heard, smelled, touched. All of the senses are activated at that point. And bottom line, when your sympathetic system gets activated, it's about survival, period. Even if there's nothing dangerous, but the system goes into an awareness and a safety stage for your survival. Sometimes people who have conditions like health conditions or thyroid conditions, and their bodies are really depleted as a result of an illness or a disease. If they do like a high intensity workout, the body starts going, oh, they're going really fast now. There must be danger. And the sympathetic system can get turned on. There's a theory called the polyvagal theory, and the polyvagal theory is based on the autonomic nervous system. And that part of our nervous system that is so primitive and reads information from the physiological perspective versus the cognitive perspective. And so when that sympathetic system gets turned on, it's fight, flight, freeze. It's ready to survive whatever is coming around the corner or down the path in front of you. The opposite branch of the autonomic nervous system is the parasympathetic system. And they have many names for this. They have rest, digest, feed, breed, restore, rejuvenate, reintegrate. There are a lot of descriptions. The vagus nerve, which is a cranial nerve, comes from the cranium down through the vocal cords and down and touches every organ in our body. That runs through our parasympathetic as well. So part of calming is working with the vagus nerve, which we can talk a little bit more about. But the system of fight, flight, rest, digest, you cannot be in both systems at the same time. And part of anxiety exists in that sympathetic system. And so should that arise or should that show up, learning techniques to bring oneself into your parasympathetic system is the goal of moving from something that is not life-threatening or survival-threatening, even though there might be a message coming in about it, working through that process and bringing oneself over into the parasympathetic system.
So just to reiterate, the sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight and stress response. And the parasympathetic is that restorative healing response, which we want to be in most of the time. When we're always in that fight or flight stress, like a little bit of stress is actually good for us, but when it's chronic, it hurts all the systems of the body. And people know that too much stress is not good for us and it causes dis-ease. Before we get into polyvagal theory, which I would love to unpack with you, you said fawning. And fawning is something I started to recently talk about on my socials. So this is, again, a stress response. So you've got fight, flight, freeze, which most people are aware of, but then you've got something called fawning, which is this trauma response to conflict or to people please in the face of conflict to just kind of dilute conflict. Can you help us understand that a little bit better?
The way it was introduced to me years ago was, so if you imagine that out in the wild, you have a lion chasing a little gazelle or a little zebra or something in the wild. Sweet little thing doesn't have as much power. It has what it has, and it will push it to the extreme. Because in that fight or flight response, it's going to run, it's going to fight, it's going to do everything it does. But if you watch animals in the wild, once everything is depleted from their system and they have nothing left, they typically will roll on their backs and expose their throats. It's a fawning. It's like, I'm done. Take me, because I have nothing left. So I equate that a lot to how we as humans are in interactions. We get so frustrated with levels of our relationships, with perhaps arguments, disagreements, things that go back and forth. And we go, you know what? Forget it. Do it your way. I don't care how we do it. Just get it done. It's like, I'm done. I don't have anything left to bring to the table anymore because I feel like it's just been beaten down or my system has just depleted all resources. So it's that sense of defeat. It's that sense of, I don't know where else to go with this. It's the sense of, I've been over this 1,000 times and it always ends the same way. So that's how I refer to the fawning.
Yeah. Isn't it also in extreme cases to just kind of please or appease the kind of person you're in conflict with because you're feeling nervous and under threat and scared? Because
absolutely,
maybe there's a past trauma of, you know, being yelled at a lot, or this is a very scary and threatening situation. So you just tell the person what they need to hear, but really you're self-abandoning. So it's not that you don't have a lot of energy to give anymore, but I've also seen this extreme form of just, let me tell you what you want to hear because I'm scared.
Yes, because I'm scared and I'm going to protect myself. So I will protect myself by telling you that so that you will then back off and I will feel like I am in a safer environment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's such a fascinating response to me, and it's one that can certainly change, but it has to change with awareness first. You have to be aware that it's happening beforehand.
Can we maybe explore polyvagal theory and what that actually is? And for people who don't know, the vagus nerve, as Judy said, is this main highway. I call it the gut brain axis, but it goes all the way down to the enteric nervous system, the gut, and it pierces all the organs. And it is the main highway that kind of illustrates or dictates to the body, the nervous system, to be in this parasympathetic or sympathetic response. And it helps us get into a parasympathetic state. So, what exactly is polyvagal theory in reference to this vagus nerve?
So, the polyvagal theory, which was introduced by Stephen Porges, in the most simplest of terms, the purpose of the polyvagal theory is for one to understand what state their body is in, so that from knowing that state, further work can be done. And it does work with the autonomic nervous system. They use a ladder approach. And the ladder is so you are in a place of social engagement where things feel safe, where there's nothing in the way of being present, of having joy, of feeling safe in an environment. Like everything is just rolling along beautifully. You can then, there's a statement that they use in that arena, and the statement is, I may. I may engage, I may laugh, I may joke, I may be in that environment. They also call that the ventral vagal area, which is the front of the body. And the front of the body is the area where we're open, where we can express, where we are free to be. Then you can move up into your sympathetic system, which is the fight or flight response. I go into anger. I go into rage. I should protect myself. The logical mind goes offline because it's really about survival. And in that moment, you're assessing, you're looking. You can have panic, you can have fear, anxiety, danger alerts are all around. And that's that fight or flight state. Then you go into what they call the dorsal vagal, which is the back. And the dorsal vagal is the more primitive part of our system. And it responds long before any of this is even noticing, realizing. You can walk onto, I don't know, an elevator, and you get a feeling about people. I've done it before. I walked into an elevator and my body had just chills up and down, and I walked right back off. I didn't like the energy of the person in the elevator. I can't tell you why, but I listened to my body. Other times we go in, we say, like we could stand next to them. We could, like, hi, it's really good to see you. So our bodies read information. And some of us are maybe a little more in tune, a little less in tune, but we're all in tune. And we can learn that attunement. But the vagus nerve, which is the largest nerve in the body, you said was the mind-gut nerve, correct?
Yeah.
So it connects us completely in here. Our respiration can be affected. Our blood pressure can be affected. Everything can be affected during these states. And by calming that vagus nerve, which touches everything in our body, we learn how to self-regulate, self-identify. What state am I in right now? Am I really in danger? And start going through that process of, is anything truly life-threatening in this moment? And that's where some of those cognitive distortions, which are all or nothing thinking, black and white thinking, catastrophizing, those types of cognitive distortions can get really caught up and be presented during these types of situations.
So when you say polyvagal theory, poly means many as opposed to like
Many.
mono. So is
Yes.
this
Yes.
the body understand there are different layers to the body and therefore different levels of intelligences or intuition?
Yes. I am not what they call a polyvagal practitioner. I've studied it like most clinicians have, but it's the way the neurons in the brain fire and communicate with each other, and then how that information passes down into the physical body.
Mhm.
And that's where our messages come from. We see something, we have different sensations in the body. There's a technique called somatic experience, which the basis of that is polyvagal theory, meaning how is the body talking to other parts of the body?
Mm.
And what are the sensations? What is one noticing when they have a thought and then they suddenly get pain in their back? What is that connection? What's firing in there? What neurons are talking to each other? And then while that happens, tears are flowing, even though there's a smile on someone's face. So all of those tiny little internal sensations and then visual sensations that, as an example, a somatic experience practitioner might look for. It's like, that's happening, but there's not an awareness or a connection to it. And working with those connections to help the body understand what state it is in. Is it dorsal? Is it ventral? Am I comfortable? Like maybe my shoulders are comfortable, but my legs are all tight. Like what's happening in the legs? So those many systems that you talk about connect and talk to each other. And through the polyvagal system, my understanding of it is that things get activated, they get deactivated. You have a low start, and then you can have a peak, and then you can come back down from those states. But knowing the state you're in is where your power starts within your own body. It's like, oh, wait, I know where I am now. This is that sympathetic response. I'm really clear about what that is. Using various techniques, which we can talk about in order just to help with anxiety in general. How to use your vagus nerve to self-regulate, how to come down from those heightened levels of fear, panic, worry, concerns about things. And it might just be someone sitting in their room saying, oh, I think I have to have a knee surgery next month. I don't know. Should I have it? I don't know. People have knee surgeries and then they can't walk. And then somebody I talked to yesterday was able to walk 5 miles. So all of this, it's cognitive dissonance, but it's also cognitive distortion. And then it starts tapping into all of those little systems in our body. And things can go haywire. That's why there are some beautiful techniques to take all those wires and rather than like a big ball of spaghetti, like pulling them out and letting them just be where they're supposed to be rather than all tangled up.
I'd love to use this as context to talking about social anxiety. You talk about feeling threatened, perceived threats, cognitive distortions. We talk about
Yes.
survival in the body. When we're in sympathetic, we're in a survival state, right? We feel like our survival is threatened. And the way I learned it, and please add or correct me if I'm off a little bit, that there are two main threats to us, to our survival. One is physical, like a lion or an enemy actually coming and harming us, causing physical harm or potential death. So we fight or flee. And then there's social threats, which means I might kicked out or ostracized from my community. And back in the day, that meant living alone in the savannas. We're more easily predated on. We live by ourselves and we're less likely to survive. So not being part of a tribe or part of a community meant death, which is why when we are judged or not loved or we don't belong, or we can feel people's energy or their facial expression being angry at us or not pleased with us, we don't like it. We don't like it because we want to belong, because our very primitive brain, or our amygdala, which is part of that primitive brain, tells us, oh, your survival is under threat. You might be ostracized from this group, and therefore your survival is very low chance.
Yes.
But in
Yes.
this world, it's a distortion because it's only social media telling me a message, or it's someone on TV, or it's colleagues. It doesn't mean if they don't like me, I'm not going to survive. I come home and I'm safe and I'm okay. So there are distortions there. So can we maybe unpack social anxiety and why it happens, what's
Sure.
going on, and what we can do about it?
So, as an example, I have worked with families through the years, and there is what's called the identified patient. A family will come in and they'll bring in Jane. Jane is their daughter who's 12. And Jane becomes the identified patient because if Jane would just start behaving, if Jane would just stop doing what Jane is doing, our family would be terrific. But it's a social system. It's not just about Jane, which is why the family system is the family system, because they are living as a system, just like you said, like a tribal system. And, from the energetic perspective of the energy systems in the body, the root chakra is your tribal chakra. It's where you learn all of those tribal beliefs, things to do and not do, things that will keep you in, things that will get you kicked out, and trying to teach one, especially children who are growing up into the tribe, that this is what to expect out there in life. And then you go out and you experience life. But that gets very distorted at times as well. And part of the distortion happens when, as an example, someone might come from a home where the parents are fearful. The parents are afraid of everything and teach the child that really life is full of fear. And then they grow up, maybe they go away to college and they meet other people, or even in high school, and they say, everyone isn't walking around in fear like everyone in my family is. Why is this? And the curious find their way out of that. And they go, this is not a state I have to be in all the time. I'm not under threat. There isn't anything that validates that sense or that feeling that I need to be in on a day-to-day basis. However, those who come from that and then move into their world that way without the understanding or not even knowing that that isn't a healthy state to be in, then that anxiety produces not making friends in school, like you said, or it might be that they're not chosen for a team, or they're a little weird. They're just finding their own tribe. That's what they're doing. And I love kids that find their own tribe, because that's where they start to get a sense of, I do belong somewhere and I like where I belong. Even though I don't know where it's going to take me, I belong here now. And I will take that, and it will begin to source my system for what that feels like and how rich that feels. And you have, especially in those earlier ages, where you develop into your first grades, and then you move up into middle school, into high school, and kids learn to be very cliquish. And it's out of fear, just like you were saying. If I don't find my little piece of safety here and abide by the rules, I might have to leave it. And I won't do that under any circumstances because it feels too safe. And yet you have kids who go, I don't care. There's something about them that says, I'm going to explore over here and see what that's like. Typically, those children do a lot better as they age and get older. I still work with teenagers now who are ready to graduate high school, and they are afraid to go into a store and ask for a product. They're still in that state of, what if I don't say it right? And what if they don't have it? Then what do I say? And how do I find my way out of that? It's a turmoil and a terrible anxiety for them. And their parents have certainly been trying to support them and guide them through that. But that anxiety started at a young age, and now they're seeing how it is affecting their older years, and they want to do something about it. They don't want to feel like all the time. So it moves from anxiety, say, at home, at school, and then it translates into those social settings, those social situations, where even getting up and answering a question in class can be terrifying for them. They sweat, they shake, their whole nervous system goes haywire just to answer a question in school. And I've worked with adults too, who have gone through that. They're now adults in business or in a professional setting, and they seek help for that. And we use various techniques to help them with that.
Yeah, I feel like social anxiety's root kind of reason is to belong, I would say.
Yes.
Or it's one of the root reasons. That's the one that comes up for me, or when I read about it or learn about it. I see it differently in different cultures. There are some cultures that are known to be a little bit more closed or tight-knit, and some that are more open. And the closed ones, I think it's more predominant in like Asian cultures or Middle Eastern cultures. When you deviate from certain societal norms, you are more likely to experience a lot more social anxiety because it's more tight and rigid. The norms are more rigid versus
Yes.
more flexible societies. I know with adults, it can absolutely stem from childhood and attachment styles. And, you talk about families, and we'll get into that in a second, and anxious attachment styles and things like this. But also, with the prevalence of social media, it's just this feeling of not being good enough or comparing ourselves to others or trying to find our tribe, but not really feeling like you belong. And so we're anxious because we are maybe putting on a front to belong, but we're not really sure we can be our true selves here. But then we're still trying to figure that out. So I see this a lot with clients that I work with. I see it a lot when I read about social anxiety. I can relate to some of this. I've lived in many countries and I went to boarding school as a child, so I can relate to it a bit. But it really comes down to like a sense of belonging because it's a very deep primal human need. So you speak about children, you speak about teenagers and family dynamics. Can we maybe unpack attachment styles and how that relates to social anxiety?
Sure. There are attachment styles. There's what they say 4 primary attachment styles. There's secure, insecure, disorganized, and avoidant. And with the secure attachment, a child grows up in a home during the first years of development where their needs are met, they are held, they are touched. Every need that they have is provided for them, and their system reads that information as safe. A child might have parents who are struggling with addiction. They may have parents who work a lot, and the children are left with other people who are not caring for them in that same way. And every family dynamic can be very different. I have one client I'm working with. His mother has been in and out of mental institutions for years, and he has a very disorganized attachment style. I don't know if I should do this. Maybe I should do that. I think if I try this, I think, this is what I had to do when just to try to make sure she was okay. And then if it was back and forth and here and there. And as an adult, he's really understood that and has gotten the basis of, I don't need to be all over the place. I can figure out what really is going on in here. He was secure from the perspective of his father was always present. So he did have a secure attachment, but that disorganized piece was showing up often. Then there is the anxious attachment where many times you'll find couples where they really know that it may not be the best relationship for them. And so they break up and then they go, but what if they're going to go date somebody else? And what if I miss something and I really need to work on this? So there's an anxiousness that goes back and forth just in that sense of, I don't know if it's really the right thing, but I think it is. And so I go back here and then I go up here again. And it's this back and forth, that anxiousness around it. And that can be a little disorganized as well. The avoidant attachment, more avoiding anything that could be serious, anything that really, I'm just not even going to address that issue. It's really not important when obviously it's important. Just avoiding anything that would require them to go a little bit deeper into a sense of responsibility, commitment, authenticity within the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And those form in those early formative years, and we carry them into our adult relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't help but carry them into our adult relationships. It was the basis of our foundation. I worked with a gentleman once who was born in an orphanage in Germany, and he was picked up and taken out for food, but he was never held until he was adopted at the age of 6 or 7. And just have someone give him a hug. He said, don't do that. This is not something my body knows. And it wasn't until he started to get into relationship and understand that that is part of human relationship, that just being touched because it was foreign to him.
So did that translate to being avoidant because he didn't know how to receive affection, or was it more disorganized?
It was more avoidant. It was more avoidant. And it wasn't until he found someone that he really wanted to be in relationship with, the desire to connect became greater than the avoidance. And that's what he came in for.
And
Yeah,
sometimes an avoidance style is something we mimic from the adults around us.
no
See,
question.
if we're loved and we're touched as children and held, but we see our families or the adults or caretakers avoiding conflict, then it's also learned behavior at times too,
Yes.
right?
Yes. And, they call them primary attachment styles. From my experience, we all have a little bit of that in our
Right.
backgrounds, depending on where we grew up, how big our families were, what we had, what we didn't have, where we went to school, where we didn't go to school. All of those things form and shape us. I often share, I grew up in a family of 8 children and 2 adults in a 1,000 square foot house, and I can adjust to anything. We had 1 bathroom. It was okay. Nobody ever went without going to the bathroom. You learn styles and ways of being just based on where you came from. Sometimes it's helpful, and other times it needs to get relearned.
I love how you said it's for the people who get curious about themselves that kind of break through the cycle, because it's like, is this serving me? It might have when I was a kid. I was resourceful in the way that I was trying to belong as a teenager or to receive love. And now, as an adult at 35, this might not be the way to do it. Or, as you said, the gentleman that you worked with was never held. And then he was in a relationship, so he got curious and had to. That's step one, I
Yes.
suppose, of breaking a pattern or a cycle.
It is. And it's
Serving.
huge. Those first little steps are so profound. And to me, are just divine miracles in action of the soul going, okay, come on, come on. I'm going to show you how to do this. I know it's a little scary, but come on. And to me, that's the energy I love working with every day. It's the curiosity of what else might be possible, or the possibilities, curiosity, possibilities. To me, that's the divine.
I would love to offer some concepts to people today, things that you and I have spoken about before that can help our audience understand themselves and their relationships better. One, for example, is the different ego states you and I have spoken about before, the transactional analysis, the child ego state, the adult, and the parent. But I'll just leave the floor to you to help us unpack it.
Sure, sure. The transactional analysis it's a modality, it's a therapeutic modality. And the premise of this modality is that in every interaction we have with another human, we are in one of 3 ego states. We are either in the parent, the adult, or the child ego state. These ego states determine how we interact and why we interact. So you might find that in the parent ego state, as an example, you can be encouraging, you can be constructive, but you can also be overbearing and very protective. And, you hear of helicopter parents, like, I'm just going to stay right here and make sure that you just stay exactly under my blade, and I'm going to watch everything. So there are those 4 types of parent ego states where under certain circumstances, they're all good, but they may cause conflict under the wrong circumstances. Then you have the child, and you can have the compliant child, the egocentric child. You can have the one that's always crying and causing trouble and doing those things for attention. And then you can have the cooperative child, the curious child, the natural child. Those states are beautiful to be in under the right circumstances. So when you're in your adult ego state, you are engaging like we are today. I speak from my adult to your adult. You speak from your adult to my adult. And when I do sessions with anyone in all the different modalities of work that I do, that is foremost in my mind. I'm not engaging from the perspective that I have to talk to their child in a certain way or to that parental part of them in a certain way. They're quite aware of those states. What they may not be aware of or experience is how this adult engagement and interaction actually happens. Many clients have said to me, I've come in here and you're actually asking me questions. They say, sometimes therapists just sit and don't engage with me. And a lot of our training years and years ago is just open the floor and let them talk. And I'm very engaging in my sessions. There's nothing better than having that adult human interaction. One, being a role model for it, and two, letting someone practice that with me and with us so that when they are, I always say, whatever happens in here happens out there. So as we start to engage more deeply, it begins to happen out there in your world as well. So part of the transactional analysis is we have ways in which we engage. So there's a little video that I often give to clients, and it's the engagement of Bob and Mary. Mary's late for work, and Bob says, Mary, you're late for work. And Mary goes, oh, I'm so sorry, Bob. I'm so sorry. I had some things to do. Well, you know, you were supposed to be here for the meeting and you missed it. Yes, I know. I'm so sorry. So that's very parent-child. Another interaction was, Mary, you were late for the meeting. And Mary goes, Bob, I know I was late for the meeting. I understand, I had something to do and I got cleared for it. And Mary says, Bob, I don't like the way you're speaking to me. And if you continue to have this type of tone, we'll have to go to human resources together. And boom, the interaction changes immediately. So in talking about the other components of transactional analysis, and again, it's really good if someone has an interest in learning more. They call it TA, transactional analysis. Just hop online, get on to YouTube and watch some of the videos, because they're fascinating as to how interactions happen. And sometimes we'll find ourselves, say, leaving a conversation and going, did I just get duped? Or did something just happen and I missed something there? Like, how is it that suddenly I'm volunteering 20 hours of my time to this thing? I don't even know how that happened. Like, how did I get talked into that maybe? So in transactional analysis also, there are what they call gimmicks. Gimmicks are ways in which someone will interact with you. They might say, oh, I've got this really big problem, and I was wondering, what are your thoughts about that? And you might give a suggestion. They go, well, no, yeah, but. And so everything that you share, it's yeah, but, yeah, but, yeah, but. And at the end of it, they go and do something completely different. And you're sitting on the other side thinking, I wonder why I just had that conversation with that person. It might be a pattern with them, with you and for them. Part of identifying unhealthy interactions is stepping back and asking yourself, how did I feel at the end of that interaction? Did I feel connected? Did I feel duped? Did I feel fulfilled? Did I feel exhilarated? Or did I walk away thinking, oh, I wonder if that person now has my wallet and all my money? Because they probably could, because they got something and I don't know how they got it. So, you feel that sense of something got by you. So they have games that people will play to find your soft spots, find your weaknesses. Although you might seem like a really strong together person, they get in there and they find those points in you and start to manipulate them, use them to their advantage in some way. So I love the whole interaction of transactional analysis, because in the end, people typically want what they want. And they'll get it through the parent or they'll get it through the child. They can get it in a healthy way through the adult to adult, but that isn't the typical way that it is done. So now there's another part of transactional analysis that brings in what they call the Karpman triangle. I call it the codependent triangle. It's talked a lot about in the book Codependent No More, which is a book from probably 25, 30 years ago. And there's a new updated version of that book now. I think it's called The New Codependent, which includes a lot of codependency issues and styles based on social media, things, through texting and through the different social media avenues that people have now. On the triangle, it's another form of communication that we have where when there is an interaction, someone might say to you, oh, did you hear about what she said at that party last night? I can't wait to go tell so-and-so that they were talking about her. So it's a triangulation And on the triangle, one point is the victim, one point is the rescuer, and the third point is the persecutor. There's always a bad guy. There's always the rescuer, and there's always somebody who's going to get it in the end on the triangle. You can switch roles within 5 different sentences. You can jump from the victim, you can jump from the rescuer. And in this triangle, there's never any good outcome. And, I work with clients and I see that there's a lot of codependency in this going on. I have them tape it on their refrigerator and I have them do a check-in every single day. Was I on the triangle today? Because if I really need to talk to this third person and you don't want to go through the second person, you have to learn direct communication. Get off the triangle. Parents do it with their children. Children do it with their parents. Friends do it with friends. Coworkers do it with coworkers. So it's the awareness around doing it. But all of these roles, nobody wants to be the persecutor, but somebody might feel justified in saying that they were in that position. And the victim role and the perfect role for a good codependent is rescuing. It's what keeps them in that dysfunctional role. So learning these ways of transacting with each other is really valuable. So that would be something too that I might recommend, that if somebody wants to learn more about it, to read Codependent No More or The New Codependent. There are lots of great books out there on codependency, but it's more about how we engage and interact that makes the difference.
And for the transactional analysis, the parent, child, and adult ego states, for anyone who's listening and isn't sure, this is all within us as adults. And it shows up in adult relationships that we sometimes step into a parent ego state or sometimes step into a child ego state. And this is not healthy, but can be especially triggered when we're in romantic relationships. And all of a sudden, we're mothering our spouse or we're acting like a tantrum child. And this is what shows up in, again, adult to adult relationships. And the healthiest place to be in is an adult to adult ego state, not an adaptive child state. That triangle you spoke about, I was like, I feel like I've had some experience there as the quote unquote rescuer, because as a coach, if I hear something and I've done a lot of work and reading on psychology, I can't call myself a psychologist, but I really love this field. And I feel like I've done a lot of learning when it comes to human behavior and how to interact and communication and attachment styles. So when I hear that my friends who I care about are having a problem, I try to go in and rescue. And I've learned the hard way. That's not, I just thought I was doing someone a favor because I might have some tools or I might have learned something or read it in a book that they could use to make themselves feel better or to alleviate the situation. But as you've described it and as I've experienced it, it actually isn't beneficial to me or to anybody. And you're saying it's a codependency. So can you share a little bit more about this triangle, not just the rescuer for my sake, but all the different pieces so everyone can really understand
I will.
it?
Yes. So there are 2 different things. One, when you're in the adult to adult ego state, that is where you can establish intimacy. And I work in the field of chemical dependency and addiction. And when people have had a background with any challenge of addiction, finding their way to true intimacy can be very challenging. I was at an amazing workshop a few years ago, and Michael Barda, who works a lot with sexual addiction, porn addiction, really every type of addiction, reminded us that authenticity and vulnerability equal intimacy. So authenticity and vulnerability equal intimacy. And he said, to become authentic and to get vulnerable are 2 of the most frightening states for humans. Mm-hmm. And so to find our way to that and then to land with new degrees of intimacy is delicious and divine, but can be very frightening and very tender. It can be a very tender space. And speaking about the codependency, I share this often. There's a little Buddhist saying, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember it exactly, but it goes like this: never, ever, under any circumstance, should we attempt or try to take someone's pain away from them.
Mm.
Because in doing so, we may be taking from them the final tool that they have to learn how to survive on their own. And why would we take that away from them?
Would you say that to a mother as well, right? Because mothers are trying to, you would.
I've said it to hundreds of mothers. And I get it. It's not that I am like, I don't have children. I have amazing nieces and nephews. I dive in like I've been there. And I understand more deeply now that you can protect them, but they have to learn. There was a time once this isn't really pain, but in some ways I was with a family, and the girl had finished dental school and she was starting her first dental office, and we're all meeting as a family. And the conversation was, the dentist says to her parents, and you still won't let me get my own checking account. I was surprised. And I said, well, what are you talking about? They won't let me handle my own finances because they think I have too much on my plate.
Mm.
We, of course, worked with that. She was almost 30 years old and not having her own bank account and not knowing how to manage her own finances. That is not that it's painful to do that, but it is a necessity to learn those skills as a young adult. And I know the parents' intentions were good, but it's also a form of control. So allowing to relinquish that control to their daughter, who's obviously so beautifully capable. It doesn't mean that your heart isn't in a good place. It means that there can be beautiful levels of learning that go along with not doing things for people. Sometimes what it says to them, oh, I'm going to do this for you and I'll keep doing it because I know you're not really capable. That's an underlying message. I hear that from kids all the time. Like, why does my mom keep doing this? Does she not think I can do it on my own? Or my dad? And it's not that, but understand that's the message that's coming in. The
Right.
message is you're still a little incompetent. You're still a little not capable.
It's that incompetence piece that I think, and that Buddhist parable, I suppose, or phrase that's important, that you are taking away someone's lesson and competency, which is maybe not fair. And if you really, as the quote unquote rescuer, want to do someone good, you're actually doing them a disservice. So understanding that piece and stepping back. I mean, you see this in romantic relationships all the time, like men trying to rescue women, or women trying to be
Sure.
rescued by men, or women trying to rescue men. So you see it everywhere. But I appreciate and understand that piece of it's not healthy and it actually can backfire. You spoke to me once about the little self and the big self. Can you unpack that for us? I really love
Sure.
this one.
I mean, I'm sure that through the years, everything comes from somewhere, but I've used for many years the concept of little self versus big self. And little self is written with small letters, big self is written with capital letters. And I often ask, what might it be like to describe your little self? What qualities might your little self have? And what qualities might your big self have? And often someone will say, my little self is insecure, gets cranky, can cry a lot over a lot of things. I want things my way. I'm confident. I go get what I want. I feel good about myself in this certain area. And then I always say, well, what percentage of your time are you spending here versus here? And often I'll get 70-30, I'll get 60-40, and really looking at how we are in that ego state. I'll call it an ego state of little self, big self. And the work that I do around it is the space in the middle. And the space in the middle is about endurance. It's like the tug of war, those games where the tug of war and like you got a bunch of little people here and maybe you have a few big ones over here. But it gets difficult sometimes. Sometimes it's just whoosh, they take it. But learning to allow the big self to become the leader. Because in the space of the big self, there is groundedness, understanding, there is solidness, there's a sense of power within oneself. And it's the qualities that help us through life, manage relationships, manage our jobs, manage all of those things that we do. And these pieces of ourselves are the pieces that exist and perhaps just haven't developed or grown yet. But as adults, many of them need to grow, but they get stuck. And so that process of moving from little self to big self is like doing an endurance sport. Anybody who's done an endurance sport, I've trained for marathons, it's like on day one, you don't go run 26.2 miles. I don't know, you do a couple of miles, right? For the first week, and then you do 2.5 miles. You don't do 26. You do it piece by piece. You begin to change the dynamic in small incremental pieces. And there was this cutest little boy once, he was 9, and I just saw him just last year, and he's now a grown adult. He's actually in his 30s. And I remember us talking about this, and I said, so what do you think the difference is between little self and big self? And he's chewing his lip, and he's got a finger, and he goes, I think I got it. I said, well, what is it? He said, when you're in your little self, it's kind of dark, and it's like kind of being in a corner, and it's cold, and I don't like it. He said, but when you're in your big self, he puts his hands on his chest, he goes, the sun is shining, and you're so full, and you smell everything in the air, and things are really happy. I said, you're done. Bye-bye. You've got this. And it was just so profound through those eyes of simplicity and how there is that difference.
How do you help someone to get there? How do you explain that to someone? What are some of the tools if they're struggling on that journey of endurance to like really
Yes.
graduate?
So things that I do are mostly to find first identifying when one is in little self, because if you don't know you're in it, you can't do anything about it. So they've written down when they feel like they're in their little self. And then first thing I'll have them do is just start maybe doing some journaling about, I was in this space today. How did it serve me? Is there anything I could have done differently? What would I like to do differently with that piece? And then we would talk about it in session and come up with some different scenarios to practice moving closer to big self. There is a therapeutic art process that I do called soul collage. And in soul collage, you make cards for all of your inner parts, which are many of those parts that aren't confident or didn't feel like they belonged or still don't belong. And what's beautiful is that you identify the parts, remembering that every part that is developed within us is developed for a reason. The reason was safety or protection. Period. That's it. Now, at age 9, it could have been absolutely solid and used for the need at the time. When you're 39 and you're using the same technique, it can be crying, stomping your feet, slamming a door, doing those things that when you're a certain age, you do it for safety or protection. At 39, maybe slamming the door isn't so cool. So we work and walk through how we develop those things, why they may have been developed, and then to update. We're just like computers. Our brains are like computers. Let's update. What's the new software? What's the new situation? What do we need to plug in order to get those scenarios and belief systems and behaviors to update with current time and to be in the present with them?
I love how you say that there is no bad part of you. And even if there is a part of you that doesn't serve or can trigger bad behavior, bad, quote unquote, bad. Well, in some cases it can be bad. It was a part of you that was trying to protect you or serve you at one point. It's called internal family systems. And there's a book called No Bad Parts. And it talks all about this if anyone wants to learn more. But it's this piece also in the work of going into big self is first that curiosity, but also really allowing all those parts of you to belong and that you're welcome here. And I guess that's also shadow work, is like even the dark, more like kind of parts of us that we don't really like, welcoming them in here, understanding why they're here, what they're trying to tell us, how they're trying to serve us. And then would you say, like, if you want to kind of go on that endurance journey towards the bigger self, trying on different behaviors, different ways of doing things, different ways of talking, even if it doesn't feel authentically you. I
Yes.
feel like that is a little plastic. And by plastic, I mean neuroplasticity, in the sense that it's maybe this whole fake it till you make it. You might not be confident, but maybe try to speak in a confident way. You might have conflict with this family member, but maybe speak in a way that's loving, even though you don't really want to. And then slowly, slowly, things can change, even if it doesn't feel comfortable in your skin at the beginning. You try it
Yeah.
on, you keep putting it on, and then slowly that can change. And that could probably also work with coming from that small self to big self, right? It's just
Yes.
trying that on, and the neuroplasticity eventually catches up with you.
And I often say, Aya, that those practices create, I think of the neural pathway sometime of like a dry desert, right? And that crack that's down the middle, everything's been running through it. And we're trying to break off just a tiny little piece, but you don't want to flood that piece. The little crack can happen and a little water runs down that new neural pathway. And what happens is the brain and the experience goes, "Oh, I liked that." You didn't ask somebody to go run a marathon. You said, "Can you walk around the block?" And they come around the block and they go, I haven't done that. That was good. So now that little neural pathway has been activated. And you don't want to flood it, because if you flood it, there's the response to flooding. And it's like, whoa, 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 stop. I don't ever want to do that again. That was too much. So you do it slowly, just like you said. And all of those, when you do it slowly, you have the opportunity to look at all those parts. I work a lot with individuals in recovery, and all of those parts that they believed they were bad, and they were using, and they did things that there's shame and guilt about, and walking into that bigger self that says, yeah, that did happen. I did do that. I'm not doing that today. I'm living a life of goodness and pride and service today to my community. And moving from here to here, I've watched it happen with thousands and thousands and thousands of individuals. So I know it's possible, but it's having the support of someone who can say, okay, you did that little piece today. That's it. You don't have to do anything else. You did that. Let that sink in. Let that saturate into your pathway. Sometimes I work also with individuals who will say to me, I did this workshop this weekend, and then in 2 weeks, I'm going away for a week, and I'm doing this, and then I'm going to do that. And I remember asking someone once, did the stuff from the first one sink in? Like it opened up these new neural pathways, but then something got layered on top of that. And there's something to be said about digestion.
Yeah.
Even in our parasympathetic, it's digestion. When you have something big that comes in, allow it to get in there and digest into your system without immediately loading something else on top of it, if you don't have to. Sometimes that's the vulnerable part. When you have this time for it to digest, and what are you going to see about yourself, and how are you going to learn from that, and what would come next? That beautiful process of taking that little self and all those beautiful parts and growing it into the big self is really a remarkable journey.
Yeah. And I think that's such a nice way to close. I mean, I think you and I could talk about a lot more topics for a lot longer, but
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful way to close, is like to slow down, to digest, to give this process space. It is a journey, it is a process. And maybe to just close on people taking away from this conversation that curiosity piece, that self-reflection piece, the slowing down piece of like really understanding what's going on, and then also just trying new things and then learning. Pick up a book, speak to a coach, speak to a therapist, learn about what's out there, just as frameworks to better understand what's going on in your body, to better understand your upbringing, your love languages, your attachment styles, and maybe to understand the people around you, and that their behavior is not personal, or they've got their attachment styles. And the more that we understand and things become transparent, I think the less anxiety we have, but also give yourself some grace if you do struggle with social anxiety. How would you like to close today's session? What are some takeaways you'd like to leave people with?
I would just encourage everyone who's listening and just thank you for listening. Because if you have been listening, it's because it's something that either you or someone you love or know might be challenged with or thinking about or talking about. And just glad that we can provide information. I just finished a book and I did a workshop on it this past weekend, a book called Breath by James Nestor. There are so many great exercises, ways to use your breath for so many components of daily life. And what it does, it allows the physical body healing. It allows your whole nervous system to become calm and quiet. And, our breath we take so for granted, and it's just something you don't even think about, but it's so instrumental in how it regulates us and how we self-regulate. And by having a quieter state of self-regulation, when we look at all these modalities and read about these things, it opens those channels a little bit more because the information can come in through a calm base versus an anxious base. So there are many ways to do that through breath, through yoga, through so many different modalities. But just finding something that brings you to that state of calm and knowing that every piece of you is worth it, worth taking the time to attend to yourself and attend to your growth and attend to your dreams and desires about what you want your life to be. So I hope that our talk today has helped with some direction for many. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And
I
thank
love
you for
that. And I
having
do
me.
love. Yes, thank you for being
Yes.
here. And I loved our conversation. I do love that book. So if anyone's curious about it, please pick it up. It's not only to manage anxiety, it's also to understand your biology.
Oh, yes.
It's a fantastic book. And Judy, before we close, where can people find you? I'll link everything below.
Yes, they can reach me by email, which is the best right now, which is Heidrich, which is HEIDRICH26@gmail.com. And I welcome emails, I welcome questions, I welcome comments. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aya. All right. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please share with family and friends that you feel could benefit from this episode, and make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a rating and review to support the show. Check out the links below for more information about my guests and where to find them. And make sure you're following me on Instagram at wholesome_practice to learn more about what I do. I appreciate you being here, and see you on the next one. This podcast is for educational purposes only and should never replace the advice of your doctor or physician. Always consult a medical professional before making any changes or adding anything new to your diet, lifestyle, or medication protocol.